So, thanks for joining me today. This is Annette Manius with Hell Bent to Sell. And I have my friend Nick Berry with me today, and we're going to discuss business succession. So, I'll tell you a little bit about Nick. Nick and I have known each other, I don't know, 10 years or more, maybe. We were in a Vistage CEO group years ago, and I was really impressed with Nick's business acumen and his processes and the things that he was doing with his business. So over the years, he has been a mentor and an advisor to a lot of business owners, probably me also, because we've had a lot of conversations. He has acquired several businesses and been recognized for growth, culture, and client satisfaction. He's been on the Inc. 5,000 entrepreneur and best places to work. Pretty impressive. And I saw the other day that he was co-author of a book too. So check him out. Um, so he's had a few successful exits that we're going to talk about today, about his exits of businesses and how that flowed. And he also has started a podcast called The Business Owner's Journey. You should check that out. I'm going to drop that information at the end of this video. Check it out. He has some really interesting people on that podcast that you're going to want to listen to. So, hey Nick, thanks for joining me today. I want
Hi,
to I
thank
want
you.
to pick up. Good to see you. I want to pick up where we had a conversation, a really good conversation the other day about business in general, because you and I are both kind of interested, more than interested in business, but also business succession. So you had told me you had four businesses that you had successful exits from.
Mm.
So can you tell the audience a little bit about each one? I think one of them is the one that we want to focus on, but I want to hear about all four and how did that roll?
Yeah. So the common theme with the four is that I put so my they were strategic. My business has been to build out my portfolio of business entities and to try to put operators in place to run those businesses. And so wouldn't have to be in the day to day. So I enjoy working with leaders, and so I didn't want to be in the trenches all the time. So but I wanted to be involved with these businesses, and so the way to do that was to build out this portfolio. So from the beginning, well, not from the very very beginning, but from the beginning of the time that I started building this portfolio with the strategy in mind, I knew like it was going to come down to finding the right type of operators, and that not just someone who can come in and make sure the day to day stays like, the trains run on time until they decide they want to move on. And then I have to go find another person. I needed an operator who was going to do that, but also was wired to eventually have like run the business, own the business, either as a partner or like in place of me. Right. So, but I wanted to make sure that I mean, that's a different type of wiring. So I wasn't just looking for an extra set of like boots on the ground who could be responsible for uh, making sure the day to day stayed intact. It was like this person's got to have an eye on the future and the DNA for to be a business owner. So that made it, I guess, like doubly challenging to find the right people, but that's the game.
So how did you know that someone had the DNA, had the DNA to either be a leader or be an owner?
Yeah. So it's fun. Like I knew just about the way that anything else as the business owners, like you don't know shit. Like um it was it was you know, the they're the like the leadership characteristics for someone being able to handle day to day is more of their being responsible and like taking responsibility than being accountable, and kind of the values, the things that you look for in a good staff member. So, that part we're familiar with. Then looking for like, okay, out of that set of people, who meets the criteria to actually what I actually want to become a partner with? Who do I want to essentially marry? And then we have this like entity that's we're to care for together. And that it gets a lot dicier then. So the out of the four, three of the four buyers were internal. So I got to spend a lot of time with them. And uh, two of them were people who that was the intention from the beginning. That was so I knew this is what I was looking for. I thought they were the person to do it, and so I brought them on board. We built it out, and it worked out. Um, One of them is someone that I'd hired as a staff member, and in a short time, I started to see things out of them, characteristics that I thought, okay, that's someone that that could fill this role. And so, in all three of those cases, I started having conversations with them, and I think you don't just come right out and say, hey, like, one of these days I want to be out of here. What do you think about that? It's I think it takes a level of awareness and maybe some strategic communication to be able to like open the door so you can uh, have those conversations, and maybe and make them comfortable, uh, or make them even realize what you're talking about. But that was the thing, is like I got that door open, and so then it became like we got the cards out on the table, and then we could collaborate on it together and say, let's create this pathway, right? In order for us to get there, we're both interested in this as a possible end point for us, an end game. So if we're going to get there, we need to create a plan, and that plan we have to be able to check a few boxes, but by the time this is going to for that goal to come to fruition. So
That's
then we were able to
interesting.
work together. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they had a hand in it.
Right. Right. Because it can't be just you, it's them also. They have to be involved in that. So it's similar to, it's interesting because you and I had this conversation the other day about how, you can't just tip your hand and say, oh, wow, one day I'm out of here. Do you want to be a leader? It's more of I think about it as a slow dance.
Yeah,
The
that's a good
guys
way.
that two of the guys that bought my business, I had brought them in as employees. Of course, in the back of my mind, I knew that one day I wanted to be out of the business, right? I just didn't know when or who. And when I interviewed both of them separately, they didn't know each other. And I said, what do you want to do in 5 years? The typical interview question. And both of them said, I want to own a business. Well, that just my radar went up and I went, okay, but you're right. You can't go, oh, really? I have a business to sell,
Yeah.
so brought them in. And then, after about a year, realized that, yeah, this is because they fit that criteria of being a leader. And then it was like, okay, now I know that. How do I teach them to lead the company and own the company?
Mm-hmm.
It's two different things, right? You can be a
Totally.
leader, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can own that business. So
Yeah.
that's a process too.
Yep. So I want to ask you about something. I think it's interesting when you said that you asked them that question in the interview, and they said, "Well, I'd like to own a business." And I really like the way that you respond to it. You're like, "Okay, that's a possibility," but you continued on. I feel like a lot of business owners would turn and run from that and be like, "Oh, I don't want to hire somebody who is like not going to be here." And I don't think that they're wrong for thinking that. It's just that door would have never gotten opened for you if you thought like that.
Right, that's right. You and I talked about that the other day, and I think it's because in my mind I had already known that at some point, at that point I had no idea when it was going to be, but at some point I wanted to be out of that business. And could this person be that successor? I mean, I didn't know if they were or not, but my mind was open to it. Now, had that happened, 10 years before that, my mind might not have been open to it.
Yeah,
So
maybe.
I think it's a mindset. You have to kind of in your mind go, okay, yeah, I'm gonna be out of here in a short period of time. The challenge, and you and I talked about this the other day, the challenge with somebody who wants to own a business, that's great. But the challenge with that, and here's what I see some business owners do, is once I opened that door, we all had to step through it. We couldn't go backward out of it.
Can't unring that bell.
You rung the bell and you got to go through it. I've seen people who will think they rung the bell and they'll say, "Okay, yeah, yeah, I'm going to have you as my successor." And then they get to the point and go, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to do this." And they try to go backward. Will they lose that person? That person is going, I'm not, this is crazy. I've seen it time and again. So, my advice to people has always been, if you have an opportunity, you need to figure out, am I in or am I out?
Hmm.
You can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You got to be in or out.
Yeah. And
And
so I think you have to be committed, and because you're trying to get buy-in from them,
right,
not necessarily in the monetary way. Not That's not what I'm talking about right yet. It's more like their level of commitment
right,
to like go on this path with you, and it's not you're not always going to be right. Like I said, I've had four that worked well. There have been a couple that did not.
right.
And I think what's really important is you have to recognize the signs early and nip it early before you get too far down that path where you're committed and they're really bought in, and you're like, well, I've known for a little while this what you weren't the guy.
Yeah, yeah. I had one of those. I
Yeah.
had a person that had worked for me, and he did a great job. Customers loved him, and this and that. And I thought, oh wow! And I actually sold him a percentage of the business. But as I went along, I realized that he really didn't have all the qualities that I wanted in somebody that would own my business. And I tell you, I to your point, we waited too long to exit him, and it was really ugly. Had I realized that sooner, it wouldn't have been the way that it was. But it was not pretty. And so you have to think about what is it that you want, what it made me do though. In business, every mistake becomes an opportunity. It made me define more about what a leader in my business should be and what an owner in this business should be. It made me put it down on paper and
Yeah.
commit to it. And I think that's why I ended up having three people that were perfect for it, is because of that mistake.
Hmm.
Don't you
Yeah.
think that,
Oh
you
yeah.
make these mistakes and you think, oh my gosh, this is terrible, but let me learn from this.
Right. Like I think the way that you're talking about the people that you ended up with, like, it's not an accident, right? Like you're able to methodically determine like here's what I'm looking for, here's what's important to me, here's how I'm going to find that. I mean, that's why you're the one who's giving the guidance here on how to create this plan. And I mean, I think for me, um, I was intentional about those things, but they weren't clear enough. And that's why, like mine, although some of them went well, some of them didn't, and some of them I may have been a little bit more lucky than good. And it worked out for me, but that doesn't mean that's the best approach.
Right, right. But I think the biggest thing about it is, I have a friend of mine that wanted to sell her business. Nobody in the business wanted to buy it. So she just felt stuck for several years. And all of a sudden, one day, this guy in her industry worked for a larger company and she knew him and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about making a change. Do you want to, have lunch?" Well, he had no intention that she wanted to buy her or sell her business, right? And so they had lunch, and it was like her mind was open to the thought about, and she said the next day I called him and said, "Hey, here's an opportunity for you." And he bought her business.
Hmm.
But she had been struggling for a couple of years trying to figure out what she was going to do, but she let her mind open to that possibility. And there was this person she hadn't even thought about walk through the door, and so she sold her business, and she is happy as she can be. It was a
Right.
struggle for a couple of years trying to figure out what she was going to do.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably always a market. There's a buyer out there for it, right?
Yes.
It may not be a very long list if the value's not there, but there's always a buyer. But from my experience, we tend to be kind of off the mark with our expectations as to what that buyer might look like.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
kind of going back to you having a methodology, you're being clear on like how do you figure out what this buyer needs to look like, and if you can hone in on that, like I think that makes it that should make the process go so much faster. That's like the hardest part in my mind.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And like I said, I learned that lesson the hard way of,
Hmm.
figuring out what does that buyer look like. And because you may not know where they're coming from, you know, I but what do they look like? I think
Yeah.
that's the big thing. So going back to what you were saying, so you had a couple of uh situations where they were leaders. Now, did those people take over the ownership also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had a couple of people who were in the business and had roles that I did. They became partners first and then eventually bought me out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had one who worked in the business and just bought me out entirely. Um, and one who we were partners, grew the business, and then we sold to a third party.
Oh, okay. Okay. So a third party that was in your industry,
Yes.
not like an equity company, because I see people
Right.
do that too,
Yep.
which that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
But
I've not sold private
yes.
equity.
Yeah. Now, didn't you tell me though that one of them, before they became an owner or a partner with you, they left and then came
Mhm.
back, right? So kind of
Yeah.
talk about that story. And that's another you got to keep your mind open story, right?
Yeah. Um, So this was somebody who was in the business, and this is the one that joined joined the business as an employee, held a leadership role. Um, but their intention, like I didn't hire them with the thinking this person is going to become a partner or buy me out. They're the ones that I started to see the characteristics after they'd been with me for a little while. Um, so they're with me for a little while, and eventually like we got that conversation started, and I think it actually started, he may have mentioned to me at some point like, am I ever going to sell, what am I going to do? And I'm like, I don't know, but I know the type of characteristics that I would look for in somebody, and if I ever started thinking about that, you are somebody that I would talk to if that's what you want. And he said yes. And I didn't really like rush into it or anything. But at some point, again, it comes up, and we're talking about it, and it doesn't come to fruition at that point. But he knows I think highly of him in that regard, vice versa. So it's a little further down the road, he gets an opportunity, goes somewhere else, and and we stayed in touch. And he went out of industry, so he has this opportunity. We're staying in touch. Maybe a year later, he reaches back out and he's like, "Hey, is this still on the table? And about like being a partner or some type of equity. I said, sure, like let's talk. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it that much since you left or we talked about it last time. Let's talk. And I think within 60 days, he was back and it bought me out.
Wow.
Yeah. Like it
Wow.
went fast from there. Uh,
Wow.
there are a lot of things like pieces. I wouldn't expect it to go that way, right? I think
No,
that's a pretty
no.
atypical path.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
For
if you
sure.
zoom out, there are some pieces of it that are like seem very typical. And or for my cases, it's I have this person like these characteristics that I had learned to recognize. I know what my big picture goal is. He and I had a good relationship and got the conversation started. Him leaving, coming back, we stayed in touch. So even though we weren't like pushing the conversation along in a direction at that point, it kind of stayed alive because of that.
Yeah.
So we kept the relationship in a good place, I guess.
So that, again, it goes back to being open-minded about what the possibilities could be,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
And also it reminds me of we were talking the other day about this, and I've had people ask me, why did you sell your business when you did? What made you know that you wanted to sell? There was a couple different factors there, but one of the factors was, like you said earlier, I rung the bell and we were going down this path. And I knew that if I didn't commit and continue down that path, although our succession plan was 5 years, that they were going to get discouraged and they might leave. And then where am I? I sort of looked at it and said, okay, bird in the hand here, maybe I'm not totally ready to sign off, but if I don't, then what does it look like? Am I going to start over? No. So, you have to in your mind just say, yeah, I'm ready. I've rung the bell. I'm ready to go. And I'm going to teach these people how to do it. But I'll tell you at the end, and I had people ask me this question too, how did it feel when the deal was done and they were the owners of the business? And I knew that I had done the right thing because it felt right.
Yeah.
It felt right. And feeling right is different for everybody. Everybody has their own thought about what feeling right does. But it felt right. So I knew that I didn't, that I made the right choice, that it
Yeah.
was the right time and it was the right people and it was the right choice. But to your point, it wasn't just by accident. We
Yep.
had a plan, worked the plan, and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things can fall into place for you if you don't have a plan, but I mean, if you've been in business for very long at all, you know what to expect, right? You
Right.
got to give yourself a best chance.
Right.
And I think like that's what I think is so cool about what you're doing. I I don't know that I mean I know that you can go and find somebody who will try to tell you how to create your plan. But there's not much in the way of instruction or support that like what you put together. So I mean, I think this is a really cool and valuable concept. I think, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. You may have seen one of my first guests on my podcast, Kiri Masters.
Mm-hmm.
We did an
Mm-hmm.
episode and she had just sold her marketing agency. She's like mid 30s and she talked a lot about things kind of fell into place for her, but she's very smart and was intentional about a lot of the steps she took. So she probably would grade pretty well as far as uh, planning. What she didn't plan for was the effect on her mental health afterwards and the void. Yeah. And so I think things like that, nobody was there to tell her to prepare for that. And I think what you just explained a few minutes ago is another kind of similar example to that, where man, if you go through this a couple of times without having a good plan or a sense for who you're looking for and you screw it up, like what if you would have the guy that realized like, oh crap, this isn't the one. If what if you'd have gone even further and then just
Right. Right. I know you got to figure that out early. I think you said that earlier is you got to figure that early, that the person is the right person or not. And then kind of take your lumps with it too. But going back to your point, I think that one of the things that hit me hard was, and this happened during the process. I was probably a year and a half out from the sale when all of a sudden one day I'm like, holy crap, this business has been mine for 30 years. So am I okay with this? Am I, it's like taking, I don't have kids, but it's like taking your kids, you've raised them till they're 13, right? And then all of a sudden somebody else is going to take over and you're not going to have any part of that anymore. That's what people who have children have and it said that that's what it seemed like to them. And so in my mind that was really hard, and no one told me that that was going to hit me like a ton of bricks, because I'm a very okay, I've got a plan, we're going to work the plan, and never thought about what's the emotional side of that. Oh my gosh. And I'll tell
yeah,
you also a story about something that happened, which put me right into perspective. So the guys that bought my business, we had a great relationship. We still do. And it was the four of us going down this path. It wasn't me, it wasn't them. It was the four of us. And we were in a meeting one day. And I said something. I was not happy about a decision that one of them had made. And I was like on this emotional, and they looked at me and said, it's not all about you. We're part of this too. You're not treating us like partners. I mean, you talk about crawling under the damn table. I was like, God, but they
yeah,
were right. They were exactly right. And that changed my whole perspective about my emotions, and it let me open up to them and them open up to me about how they were feeling. I was scared, they were scared, we were on two different, I was scared for these reasons, they were scared for these, so it made it that, so that emotional piece of it. And I think for me, going back to what you were saying about Carrie, I had reconciled all those emotions before the sale, but a
yeah.
lot of people don't get that opportunity, or they don't allow themselves to do that. And that
Hmm.
emotion comes at the end, after they're out, and they're like, what did I do? And now what do I do? So it, part of my course, so I've created a course for how to do this business succession. And part of the course, there's actually several lessons in there about handling those emotions, and how do you deal with that, because you've got all the, they need to be leaders, and they need to, but what about you and how you feel about, I created this, and now, who am I?
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of that that you have to you have to reconcile these things, but it also on both sides for you and the buyer, we're all going to change as we go
Yes.
through this. You just mentioned the buyers saying to you like you're not treating us like we're partners.
Yeah.
That was one of the things. This is one of the things that I think I got right with the people that I worked with was being really clear. Like there at certain points, I telling them like, look, we're peers now, right? So you have to walk in here and you have to act in this conversation as a peer, not just as somebody who's like a subordinate.
Right.
And that because they couldn't step into their new role if they still felt like they had to, they worked for Nick,
Right.
right? So kudos to those you guys and you for like they caught that and we're already stepping into that role because You don't want to have to drag somebody into that role. You got
No.
the wrong person if you're having to drag them into that mentality.
That's exactly right. You got the wrong person if you have to drag them into that. And they were there, and I just wasn't fulfilling my piece of it. I mean, it really, at that point, it was all on me. And it's funny because later on, one of the guys said, we talked about this, between the three of us, and we were so scared to say it to you because they didn't know how I was going to react to that. But I
Hmm.
was like, yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. And thank you for pointing that out. So that was a pivotal point in our relationship, and my mental, thinking about what that was going to look like.
Hmm.
So yeah, but you got to get, so that goes back to, you got to have the right people. You got to vet that out, especially if you're going to do a plan like your guy. He came in, and when 60 days he bought the business.
Yeah.
For me, it was a 5 year. I was living with these people for 5 years.
Hmm.
Right. But, and, going back to what you're saying, it's almost like a marriage. You're joined in this venture with them. And
Yeah.
man, if you had the wrong people, ugh, you know, I,
Yep. It's you want you really I do think there's a lot to be said for treating it like a marriage because you want to do your due diligence, right? You need to make sure let's date for a little while, get to know this person. Is this somebody
right,
that you really want to commit to for whatever period of time?
right.
Um, because you
Yeah.
are locked in.
Yeah. Yeah. You're locked in. And if you decide that they're not the right people, it's like a divorce. It can be ugly.
Mm.
It's the same. It's an interesting analogy, but it's,
Ugly, expensive,
yes.
painful. Just
Painful. Yeah, very much so. So we could probably go on all day long talking about this. It's a great subject. So I may have you on again
of course.
to talk about it. Anything else you want to, any other wisdom you want to impart on my audience?
Uh, I mean, I think I'm just going to go back to reinforcing the benefit of what you're doing, right? There are a lot of ways that you can go through this process, but by chance is not the way, right? So finding someone who has been through it, who is pulling all the pieces together and you haven't said this, but I think you probably are saying like putting this together and looking at it like, here's what I wish I would have had from the beginning. This is the guidance that I wish somebody would have had to be able, or someone would have been able to give me from day one. And so, like, I just think that's invaluable, especially if you're at that point where it's time for you to start thinking about this thing, getting out of your business. I love that what you're doing, putting a resource like this together.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And that's exactly why I started, once I exited the business. Well, actually, before I exited the business, I said, there has got to be something that I can put together all in one package. All the things that it took me forever, it seemed like, to pull it together, all the information. And there really wasn't clear information on anything.
You had
So
there's got to be a better way,
there's
Epiphany.
got to be a better way. I know.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what this became, is there's got to be a better way. And I know that, there's I can't even imagine how many people, I know there's a statistic somewhere about how many people will leave or sell their businesses in the next couple years. It's
Mhm.
huge. It is huge. So I think this can be invaluable. So I appreciate you saying that. So at the end of this video, I'm going to put information in here about Nick's podcast, The Business Owner's Journey, which is really interesting. He has multiple types of people on there. You had the marketing guru on there last week or the week before.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Roland
No,
Gurney.
Jance. What's his name?
Oh, John Jantz.
John Jantz.
Yeah,
John
yeah.
Jantz.
Mhm.
I have followed him for, I don't know, 20
Oh,
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's great. He's great. So Nick has some really good, interesting people on his podcast that you all will want to look at. So I'll drop that information after the video, and then also information about how you can look at my course and see if it's something that's good for you. I think that if you're thinking about selling your business, yeah, you need some guidance, and I can help you.
If
So
you're thinking about selling your business, this is information you need to know.
yes, yes. Thanks so much, Nick, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.